Hello, everyone. If you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. If you've listened to some of our podcasts before, welcome back. This is Infant and Toddler Development at Triton College, hosted by the Communication Department. Today, we are going to be talking and digging a little deeper into motor development and what this looks like. And today, I have our esteemed adjunct and guest, and she does so much more than that. But Dr. McCrae is here with us. Welcome, Dr. McCrae. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to talk about these questions with you. But first and foremost, introduce us to who you are.
Wow. I think I'll start from the beginning. I'm from a small country town called Mount Sterling, Kentucky. I completed my associate degree in computer programming. At that time, I then transferred and moved to Chicago later. I've got a bachelor's in behavioral psych from National Louis University. Then I graduated from Erickson Institute at Loyola University with a master's in early childhood education. And then I finished my doctoral degree in education from Northern Illinois University. That's my educational arena. In the work field, I've worked in Head Start, early Head Start as directors. I've worked at Illinois Masonic Hospital as a developmental therapist. I work privately for myself in early intervention. I used to be an entrepreneur and own my own daycare. I used to run all child care in the city of Chicago for the YWCA before they shut it all down. So that's just a little about me.
Yes. You've done so much in early childhood and early intervention. We haven't quite gotten to the early intervention unit in this, but do you mind very quickly, just for those who may not know yet, just a very brief summary of what early intervention is?
Okay. So early intervention program is a program that is designed to help families. It's a parental-driven program. So if a child, anyone can make a referral. It could be the pediatrician, it could be the family. You will call the child, I was going to use acronyms, the Child Find Connection based on zip code. You will call this number and they will ask you, what are your concerns? If it's globally, they will send out a physical therapist, occupational, DT, speech, maybe a social worker. They'll evaluate the child. If the child qualifies, they can receive services in the home. They'll draw up a document called IFSP, Individualized Family Service Plan, and in this plan the goals are written what the parents want to work on. So if parents want the child to walk, the goal could be stated, I want Johnny to walk, and then the therapist comes in and writes down the strategies on how to help that child walk.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So kind of now shifting to our topic for today.
Okay.
When we're talking about domains of development and developmentally appropriate practices, we're typically talking about 4 domains. Some people still classify them as 3: social, emotional, cognitive, language, and motor. Some people are now saying 4, with cognitive and language being separated, which is a bigger issue than we have time for. But today we're focusing specifically more on motor development. Mm-hmm. And so in your definition as having taught classes and being in the field so intensely, what is your definition of motor and physical development?
So in motor development, there is 2 areas that I look at as a therapist and as a professor. In motor, there is fine motor, which is looking at the small muscles, right? And then we have gross motor, which is your large muscles. That's working on head controlling, the child rolling, sitting, crawling, walking, jumping. So I look at them as totally different in motor area. Fine motor, fine muscles, then gross motor is the large muscles.
Awesome. So we talk a lot about theorists in our programs and through our classes. Is there a specific theorist or theoretical perspective that you find connects better to motor development? And do they help explain how anyone who works with an infant or a toddler should be thinking about motor development? Definitely.
The theorists that, I have a couple of them that I really like. That's the first one is Vygotsky, ZPD, Zone Approximate Development. Because when we go into the homes, we're the more skillful person, or the parent is, however we're doing it, where we're coaching or actually doing hands-on. But the most skillful person could be another child in the house, teaching a child how to roll over, or to having a toy placed in front of them to motivate that child to move. I like Vygotsky. I think ZPT is essential, bridging the gap from what they can't do to what they can. The other one I really like is Bronner-Brennifer. It talks about the individual and the microsystems and the culture, how that affects what we do in everything, whether it's education, whether it's in academia, whether it's in business. Our culture and subculture practices affects everything we do, whether we recognize it or not. So those are the two ones that I really like.
Absolutely. I like how you picked two that kind of work together, because with one, you have everything working together outside of just the child. And with the ZPD, you have a direct connection between peers and adults, but then it's somehow part of that bigger ecological theory.
Yes.
Which is really, they work really well together.
It does.
ZPD might be new for some people. Do you mind elaborating just a little bit more on that? And there's a term we use in it, scaffolding, that a lot of students have heard or people have heard, and they're like, I think I know what scaffolding is, but now you're throwing it in the ZPD. What does that mean?
So I guess to put it in layman terms, ZPD is Zone Approximate Development. That's what the acronym stands for. And then we talk about scaffolding. Scaffolding is like, if, for example, if we have a child who could stack blocks, right? And we have a child who doesn't know how to stack blocks. And they could be playing in the same block area. And they're the same chronological developmental age, like a 2-year-old, and one stacking the block on top of each other, and the other child's watching because maybe they have not been exposed to stacking blocks. Then they'll come in and actually do it, and the child can mimic what that child is doing. That's why it's so important to have kids and where they're with other children and learning from them. So I hope that answered your question.
That answered
Giving an example
right.
of what it looks like.
Especially because it's such a big theory, sometimes we forget how simple it is. And especially when we're talking in the classroom about it, again, it can just be something that students feel is, I can't actually learn this, when it's really those simple little moments between each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you're in a classroom, a lot of our students are teachers already at a daycare.
Yes.
So when you relate theory to practice, I think that helps bridge the knowledge, right? Like one-on-one correspondence. And we're like, well, we're not doing that in classroom. Like, yes, you are. If you're passing out napkins, each napkin represents a number, and you're teaching our kids that each napkin represents a number. And that's the beginning understanding of math, is one-on-one correspondence. So we're doing it, but we have to put that theory to practice to help bridge it.
So from teaching the courses as well as being in the field, what have you noticed are the typical patterns and sequences of motor development in infants and toddlers?
Okay, so let's talk about fine motor first. With infancy, of course, we got to make sure they're typical developing child, that we need to make sure that when in EI we check the birth history, that the child passed the newborn hearing screening, right? That the child passed their vision screening. So before reaching, we need to know, can the child see, right? So with a newborn, that's why we encourage our babies to have them in different positions. You can have them on their back. They could swipe at a toy. That's the beginning of reaching, right? Just reaching up and trying to swipe at the toy. Tracking, moving it slowly from left to right, up and down, making sure vision is that they can track. As the child grows and develops in the fine motor area, they move from swiping to different types of grass. There's the rake grass where it kind of goes down like this, and then they'll fine tune it to a pincer grass. So, and then, they have the fisted where they're holding, trying to write. So we want to make sure it starts with vision for tracking, with the swiping of the toys for our infants, and then the grasping comes in from the rake grasp to the pincer, things like that. With gross motor, that's the large motor area, right? So head control. So when you first have a baby, we're holding the child up because the head is so wobbly. But as the child as the infant gets stronger, they have better head control. So it starts from the head. So we do tummy time, but keep in mind culture and subculture practices influences everything we do. Some culture doesn't want to put their babies on the floor, some wants them on the bed, right? So if you put the baby on their tummy in prone position, they could work on that head control and get started with their gross motor. It starts from the head and then it trickles down to the rest of the body.
So there was one thing you're talking about in fine motor that I, in my experience, have found that some 2-year-old teachers specifically have difficulty with, is that children sometimes hold pens or pencils with that fist grip, and they're trying to force them to already move to a traditional pencil grip. What would you say for those teachers who are like trying to move them very quickly into that?
I think we should go, I tend to follow the child's lead. You may see them holding it fisted, or they may hold it kind of like this. I mean, when I present a toy, I always present it in midline. So midline is in the middle. So as I'm presenting in midline, whatever the hand the child goes with, I may use hand over hand assistant to help support them with that. And then we could carry that over in the home as well. Parents can do it, teachers can talk about that with the parents to encourage them to hold it fisted.
I know I've had a lot of teachers that I've worked with who have had the concern of, but they need to learn how to hold it correctly now because they're using the materials now. And is it bad that they're using the fist grip, or?
I don't think it's bad. I mean, some cultures, depending on what you're using it for, like some families encourage like they eat with their fingers instead of using a utensil like a spoon. So, you know, I think it depends on the culture, subcultural practices. It also depends on if we're talking about a typical developing child who has range of motion in both hands with no problems. And then we got to talk about in early intervention, what is the family's goal? Because it's the teacher wants it. Is that a priority for the family?
No, and that's wonderful to think about, especially with how culture may play into this more than we think. And you talked about the midline as well. The midline, I've learned, is incredibly important. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the importance of the midline?
So when I'm working in fine motor, I'm always facing the child, and then when I present, the child may reach with the right or left. Hand dominance comes later, right? So whatever hand they reach with is what we work with. Long time ago, it shows how education has evolved. Long time ago, we was all encouraged or hit on our hand that we're supposed to use the right hand or not the left. But now, as a therapist, we encourage the kids to use both hands equally, because when we do our assessment tools, each hand has different range of motions. So you may look at the right hand, they have a really great fist or pencil grasp with the left hand, they're totally opposite. So I think working with the family is essential. Encourage the child to use both hands equally is so important. And remember, just because they're in our classroom as a teacher doesn't mean they're our child. The parents is another first and most important teacher of their life.
Absolutely. I appreciate that reminder, because we do need to be reminded that sometimes what we see isn't always what people are seeing at home or expecting at home.
Right.
There's sometimes different expectations in infancy and toddlerhood.
Yes.
And being able to communicate those is
and respect it.
Yes, absolutely.
And respect it.
And respect it. That is a huge part of it. We've talked about some of these milestones, some misconceptions, using the midline. What are some effective strategies for promoting healthy motor development in infants and toddlers?
Healthy strategies. Wow. It depends on the child's age, right? If it's an infant, we want to, of course, put them in prone position, that's on their stomach, or supine on their back for infants. If it's a toddler, for gross motor, if they're not walking, then we want to work on cruising, having them pull up to a stand. And, it depends on the age of the child and what their skill levels are and what they're doing to help give the different strategies. Each developmental age that they're functioning at has different sets of strategies we move toward. So if they're trying to learn how to stand, we work on pulling up to a standing position and cruising, right? Or we'll have them lean against the back of the wall and then see if they'll take 2 steps toward you for a toddler. So it depends on what the child really needs.
And probably in addition to what the parents are looking for.
And what's
Absolutely.
in that goal, what's in that IFSP. What's in that IFSP, yeah. depends.
So you've talked a bit about early intervention. Are there other types of interventions that are available for infants and toddlers that may not be meeting their milestones that parents want them to meet, or that teachers are noticing that they are far behind in, or even pediatricians? Are there other early interventions or just early intervention?
Well, that's my passion, is early intervention. I've been out here 32 years, all over Chicago and Oak Park. When I first started in early intervention, I didn't even have a car. And I would take 4 buses from the north side to the west side to go see families carrying toys on my back.
4 buses?
4. And that's when we used to have snow past the knee, right? And 50 below. I'm still out here. So early intervention has been my passion. It's something I'm really good at and natural. There's other programs out here. I'm not sure what the names of them, but I guess it was depending on what the family's looking for. Yeah. Chicago Park District has some great programs for mom and tot groups or dad and tot groups. There's some great programs out here. I'm just not familiar with all of the ones that are available.
I know there's a ton of different resources for different things, depending on if parents just want an article versus if they want a therapist to evaluate.
Yes.
There's a range, and we're very lucky because there seems to be more and more coming out for early childhood,
right,
which is what we want.
That's what we need.
That's what we need.
That's what we need. I think for daycare centers, I think we should start using AGES ASQs that will help us find those babies who need help. Right now, it's not a requirement to get birth history and ASQs done in a daycare setting, and they should look at that because we can help find those kids who need help. Pediatricians now are doing screenings to identify those kids who may need extra help or may qualify for early intervention. But it'd be nice if daycares would do it. Now, if you're depending on the funding, like if you're a Head Start, early Head Start, and they're getting federal dollars, I think they're doing these developmental screenings, they're doing a curriculum, but some daycares that are privately owned, they're not required or not doing that. They're doing their own thing. So we should look at that as educators to include ages and stages as part of a tool to help us identify these children early if they need help.
Absolutely. I know I was lucky enough to work in a center that promoted ages and stages, had the parents fill them out and the teachers got the results, and then we talked through the answers with the parents as teachers.
Yes.
And first of all, that was wonderful time for us to bond with the parents, because we always talk about bonding with the children, but you also have to build a bond with the parents.
Yes.
And also for us to see together what each of us were seeing between classroom and home connection.
Definitely.
For sure.
So trust is important.
Yes.
My article that I published, was it 2 years ago, Spiritual Leadership and Early Intervention, it talks about those things, trust and love and honesty, because people know when you're real, when you're sincere, when you're phony. And to help our families, they can see through you. I know what started my topic was my families would tell me I'm different. I'm not just coming in here doing the strategies and leaving. They're telling me that there's something that they see in me that's different. So that's when I start looking into and learning more about leadership and learn more about what leadership looks like. So while we're in a classroom, we should be aware of our leadership style.
Yes.
How we work with our children and how we work with our parents, and watching our body language, our nonverbal cues, making sure our arms are relaxed and down. Are we moving in when we're talking? Are we hearing what's being said? All of that affects relationship and building trust working with these parents.
Absolutely, especially when you're talking about motor. And I know that from talking to some of my students, having some personal experience myself, not having that trust with the parents, when you try to say, hey, I saw this in the classroom, and we don't try to label anything, we just try to say what we see, of course, because we're not doctors if we're teachers. But sometimes that can be met with resistance, or it could be met with, I don't know you well enough to trust what you're saying. And I think that's where the resistance really comes from in trying to talk about motor development. Do you have any tips or advice, even if you just keep expanding on spiritual leadership and how that can help teachers with moments where they're trying to communicate about motor development?
When it comes to motor development, I think the parents need to trust your expertise. That's why we go to get our associate degrees. That's why we get our bachelor's, our master's, our doctorates. We need to show them that we're not just glorified babysitters, but we are professionals, right? We have been going to school at night. I've done that, right?
Yes.
Driving hours trying to. So to help families feel that we are valued with and respect what they're saying about their child. I always talk about the child's strength. Let's talk about what the child can do, and then talk about later maybe some things we want to work on that they want us to work on. And building that partnership is essential to help families move to the next developmental levels. Now keep in mind, if you've got a family that's been through, who is an atypical child in the motor domain, fine motor and gross motor, if this child's had multiple surgery, has maybe a diagnosis of Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, they're very guarded and they're keeping these babies close. So you have to not push your agenda on these families. You have to respect their journey and where they came from.
Absolutely. So we've had a very robust conversation about motor development. Is there anything that I missed that you want to add to the conversation that we need to be aware of, that we may have missed while we were talking, or that you want to elaborate on?
Wow. This is my passion, so I can talk about it all day.
Yes.
I love what I do. I love the families. That's what makes me an expert. My families that I've had from Iran, Syria, Puerto Rican, Argentina, Guatemala, China, Polish, all my families that have worked with me, I just want to give them all a shout out and thank you for helping me become the best therapist I could be, and bringing it to academia to help my students learn how to put theory to practice. So if you want to be an early childhood educational, let's go to school, let's learn.
Yes. All right. So I know we've been having this beautiful conversation, which I appreciate, and I could just sit and talk with you all day about this, but I know we are both busy people who have to move on with our day. For this question, I want you to look at one of the cameras and talk to our audience. I know that's a little more asking more, but based on our conversation, or any other topic when it comes to infants and toddlers, what advice would you give the people listening who they want to work with infants and toddlers, whether it's as an early interventionist, as a teacher, as a nurse or a pediatrician? What would you tell them?
Sure. So I'll just say this, and this is from my heart. When you get your degree, and I encourage my students this, who are working on their associate degrees or their bachelor's, there is so many things you can do with this degree in early childhood education. If you decide to do the certificate program, that's great as well. But you can become a developmental therapist. You can become a teacher with your associate degree. You can become a life specialist, I think it's life child specialist, I think it's the terminology, at a hospital. You can be a nanny. There are so many opportunities for you in early childhood education. But make sure this is, it's a goodness of fit between you and that professional. A lot of people say we don't get paid a lot, but it's about making a difference in children's lives and families' lives.
Thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for giving advice to our listeners. We appreciate everything that you do here, and I'm so appreciative of your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.